The Dominion had conquered thousands of worlds. They believed themselves unstoppable, their rule unchallenged. Then they invaded a human colony. At first, it seemed like an easy victory. The humans surrendered their weapons. They obeyed orders. They let the invaders take control. But then, the disappearances began. Patrols never returned. Strongholds fell silent. There were no battles, no warnings, only empty streets, and the gnawing realization that the humans weren't resisting. They were waiting. And when the Dominion finally understood what was happening, it was already too late. Because they had made the one mistake the elders warned them never to make. They gave humanity a reason to fight. The Galactic Council chamber was silent. Not the silence of order, but the silence of dread. The kind that settled over a room when those within it realized they had no control over what came next. The elders sat motionless, their expressions grim, their many eyes fixed on the glowing holographic display floating above the central podium. EOS 3 occupied. The message pulsed in cold, unfeeling letters. A human colony had fallen. The Vortani's Dominion had ignored every warning, believing themselves invincible. They had struck first, and now the galaxy held its breath. Elder Vashton, the oldest among them, exhaled slowly. His gnarled hands folded over one another as he regarded the council. Do they truly not understand? His voice, though quiet, cut through the tense silence like a blade. Across the chamber, General Kether of the Vortani's Dominion scoffed. His deep red exoskeleton gleamed under the council's dim lights, his mandibles twitching in irritation. Understand what, Elder? He sneered. That humans are weak? That they were given a seat in this council out of pity, not power. Vashton turned his ancient eyes toward him, and for the first time that night, the arrogance in Kether's stance faltered. No, the elder said, that they do not start wars. They finish them. The first mistake the Vortanis made. The Vortani's Dominion had long been an empire of conquest. They took what they wanted, crushed anyone who resisted, and ruled through sheer, overwhelming force. When they set their sights on EOS 3, a flourishing human colony on the outer rim, they saw it as nothing more than an easy target. Their invasion was swift. The colony's defenses fell in hours. Human settlers were rounded up, their cities occupied, their technology seized. A decisive victory, or so the Vortanis believed. But if it had been so easy, why had the humans not fought harder? Where were their reinforcements? Their counterattack? The answer should have terrified them. The humans weren't responding because they were thinking, watching, calculating. And when humanity thinks before it acts, it does not retaliate with simple force. It retaliates with finality. On EOS 3, the Vortani's soldiers reveled in their victory. They occupied human homes, took what they pleased, and enforced their laws. The humans, for the most part, remained eerily compliant. They did not resist. They did not fight back. Yet, something felt wrong. The reports from the Vortani's officers stationed on the colony were unsettling. The human civilians did not cower in fear. They did not beg for mercy. In fact, many of them smiled when they saw their conquerors. It was not the smile of the defeated. It was the smile of those who knew something their enemies did not. The more experienced Vortani's commanders began to grow uneasy. Their soldiers moved through the human cities freely, yet they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The humans spoke in hushed tones, passing messages that the translators could not fully decipher. They maintained their routines, working, eating, tending to their homes, but there was a sense of quiet determination in every movement. Then the first one vanished. A Vortani's patrol, 5 soldiers strong, failed to check in one evening. Their last recorded transmission was routine, nothing unusual. Yet, when reinforcements arrived at their last known location, all that remained was their discarded weapons, scattered on the ground. There were no bodies, no signs of a struggle. The official report labeled it an anomaly. The officers reassured their troops that it was nothing more than a minor logistical error. But the soldiers weren't convinced. Then it happened again. Another patrol. Then another. The disappearances spread, growing more frequent. The humans never fought openly. They never fired the first shot. But they were moving in the shadows, striking when least expected. And across the stars, in the heart of humanity's domain, encrypted messages flashed through hyperspace. Unseen forces moved in the dark. The fleets remained in position, not out of fear, but out of patience. Humanity would not strike first. But when they did, the Vortanis would never forget it. The first disappearances were dismissed as isolated incidents, accidents, misunderstandings. But as more Vortani soldiers vanished, fear began to seep through the ranks like a slow-moving poison. At first, the High Command refused to acknowledge the problem. Their warriors were the strongest in the galaxy, the conquerors of a dozen worlds. How could they be afraid of unarmed civilians? Yet, the facts remained. Patrols continued to go missing. Entire squads, fully armed and trained, would check in for their routine rounds, and then never be heard from again. No distress signals. No signs of battle. Just silence. But the worst part wasn't the disappearances. It was the smiles. The humans still walked their occupied streets, as if nothing had changed. They bowed their heads in compliance, followed orders without hesitation, and carried on with their daily lives. But there was something else beneath the surface. A quiet confidence. A patience that felt unnatural. It was as if they were waiting for something the Vortanis did not understand. A colony that refused to break. General Kether had fought in more campaigns than he could count. He had seen broken species kneel before the might of the Dominion, had watched entire civilizations surrender in despair. He knew the look of the defeated. And whatever the humans were, they were not defeated. He sat in the command center of EOS-3, reviewing footage from the colony. He watched as his patrols moved through the streets, their armored boots clanking against the pavement. He watched as humans stepped aside, obedient, unarmed, utterly powerless. Yet something about them unsettled him. His claws tapped against the control panel. The footage played again. His soldiers barked orders. The humans obeyed. Yet some of them smiled. Not mockingly, not in defiance, but as if they knew something the Vortanis didn't. Kether narrowed his eyes. What are they planning? He turned to his second-in-command, Commander Jek. The younger officer stood stiffly at attention, his mandibles twitching in agitation. How many have we lost? Kether asked. Jek hesitated. 42, General. Kether's claws curled into a fist. 42 soldiers, gone without a trace. No bodies, no signs of resistance. That was not war. That was something else entirely. Increase the patrols. Double the numbers. Arm them with thermal scanners and motion detectors. I want every inch of this colony monitored. Jek hesitated again. Speak, Kether snapped. The commander's mandibles twitched. Sir, some of the men are growing uneasy. There are whispers that... Whispers. Kether snarled. Jek lowered his voice. They say the humans are hunting us. Kether bared his fangs. Enough of this cowardice. We have crushed their defenses. Their fleet is nowhere to be seen. They are weak. He gestured to the monitors. Look at them. Walking like cattle, unarmed, powerless. What can they possibly do? Jek's eyes flicked to the screen, watching as a group of humans passed by one of their patrols. A woman with a child. An old man. A worker in worn-out clothes. One of them, just for a second, turned their head and met the camera's lens. And smiled. Jek swallowed. I don't know, sir. The first message. The following morning, the first body appeared. A Vortani soldier, stripped of his weapons and armor, tied to the Central Plaza's monument. His throat had been cut with precision. His eyes were still open. Pinned to his chest was a single piece of paper. Leave. The Dominion had expected resistance. They had prepared for riots, sabotage, maybe even a desperate counterattack. But this was cold, calculated. And the worst part? The humans did not react. They walked past the body without fear, without concern, as if it was expected, as if they knew there would be more. Kether stood in the plaza, staring at the body. His officers surrounded him, their weapons at the ready, their eyes scanning the streets. But there were no enemies in sight. Only the civilians. Watching. Waiting. Jack stepped forward. "Sir, orders?" Kether's mandibles clenched. He had never felt this before, not in any battle, not on any world. It was not fear. No, fear was something he had conquered long ago. This was something worse. A realization. The humans had never been afraid of them. They had been waiting. "Find them," Kether growled. "Whoever did this, I want them caught. I want them executed in the streets for all to see." Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, General." As the Vortani soldiers spread out, searching for an enemy they could not see, a message was being transmitted across human space. One sentence. One warning. They gave us a reason to fight. Fear was spreading. Not among the humans, but among the Vortanis. They didn't speak of it openly. Not yet, but it was there. In the way their patrols clutched their rifles tighter. In the way they flinched at every shadow. In the way they moved in groups now never alone. For the first time in Dominion history, an occupation force was afraid of the conquered. General Kether refused to acknowledge it. "Pathetic," he growled, pacing in the command center. "We are the Dominion. We do not fear primitive creatures who lack even the will to fight us directly." But the numbers did not lie. Another 12 Vortani soldiers had disappeared overnight. No signs of struggle. No traces left behind. Just empty barracks. Commander Jack stood stiffly beside him. His mandibles twitched, his claws tapping against his belt. He had served under Kether for years, had followed him across a dozen campaigns. Never once had he questioned an order. Until now. "General, we must consider the possibility that we have underestimated them." Kether whirled on him. "Do you hear yourself? We control this planet. We crushed their defenses. They should be on their knees." Jack hesitated. "And yet, sir, they are not." Silence filled the room. Outside the command center's reinforced windows, the city stretched out beneath them. It should have looked conquered, beaten. Instead, it pulsed with something Kether could not define. Not rebellion. Not open resistance. Something worse. Confidence. The hunters become the hunted. That night, the streets of Eos, 3, were deathly quiet. Vortani's patrols marched in pairs of 6, their weapons at the ready. Their scanners swept every alley, every doorway, every rooftop. They were not taking any chances. And yet, the disappearances did not stop. A patrol near the industrial district failed to report in. Another squad sent to find them also vanished. Then another. The Dominion's war doctrine relied on overwhelming force, on making the enemy afraid to even consider fighting back. But how could they fight an enemy that refused to be seen? Panic began to set in. Soldiers who once marched with pride now moved with caution. Officers barked orders, but their voices betrayed their unease. And the humans? The humans smiled. Even in the dim glow of streetlights, even under the watchful eyes of armed conquerors, they moved through the city as if they still owned it, as if the occupation had already failed. And maybe Kether realized it had. A message in blood. The breaking point came at dawn. When the Vortanis gathered in the central plaza for their morning briefing, they found the bodies of their missing soldiers, hung from the administrative building in perfect rows, stripped of weapons, marked with symbols the translators could not decipher. But the meaning was clear. A warning. Jack stared at the sight, his mandibles clicking softly. "Sir, this is not the work of an undisciplined resistance. This is something else. Something organized." Kether's claws curled into fists. This was no longer an occupation. This was a war. And the humans had already decided how it would end. General Kether was no stranger to war. He had crushed rebellions, burned worlds, and broken entire civilizations beneath the Dominion's rule. He had seen enemies tremble at the mere sight of Vortani's war banners. But for the first time in his long and decorated career, he felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not frustration, something colder, doubt. The humans had killed again, and not in desperation, not in open battle, but with cold, calculated precision. The bodies of his soldiers still hung from the administrative building, a silent declaration of war. And yet, despite the massacre, the humans of Eos 3 went about their lives as if nothing had changed. They walked the streets, worked in their shops, laughed with one another. They were not afraid. They were waiting. A city that would not kneel. Kether slammed a clawed fist against the table in the command center. Enough. His voice echoed through the chamber, but the officers around him remained tense, their unease thick in the air. Commander Jek stood nearby, his mandibles twitching in silent thought. "They are playing a game we do not understand," he said finally. "And we are losing." Kether bared his fangs. "We outnumber them. We outgun them. We have taken their colony, their weapons, their leadership. What could they possibly be waiting for?" Jek's eyes flicked to the monitors displaying live feeds of the city. "For us to make a mistake," Kether snarled. "Then let's not give them the chance. Mobilize the forces. I want every human settlement locked down. Nighttime curfews. House-to-house searches. No more disappearances. No more games." Jek hesitated. "General, if we push too hard, we risk pushing them into full-blown rebellion." Kether's gaze burned. "They are already at war with us, Jek. They're just better at hiding it." The trap closes. The Dominion soldiers flooded the streets, their presence heavier than ever. Roads were blocked, patrols doubled, drones filled the sky. Every human was questioned, their homes raided, their movements restricted. And yet, the disappearances did not stop. They increased. Squads vanished mid-patrol, entire checkpoints left abandoned. Weapons caches were raided, vehicles sabotaged. The more pressure the Vortanis applied, the more precise the human attacks became. But there was no sign of resistance fighters. No messages demanding surrender. No captured insurgents. Only silence. And the smiles. The damned, unnerving smiles. Kether watched them through the surveillance drones. The humans were calm. Too calm. Even when questioned, even when forced from their homes, they did not plead or protest. They simply watched. And waited. Then, on the third night of the crackdown, the command center lost contact with 3 key outposts simultaneously. Kether watched the monitors in stunned silence. Entire garrisons had gone dark within minutes of each other. No alarms. No distress calls. Just nothing. "How?" Jek whispered. Kether did not answer. Because he already knew. The humans had never been waiting for the Dominion to retaliate. They had been waiting for them to panic. And now, the real war was about to begin. The first blow. The first explosion shook the command center like a thunderclap. The emergency lights flickered, and a low hum filled the room, an alert system warning of an exterior breach. "Perimeter defenses compromised," a technician shouted. "Unknown forces infiltrating Sector 4. "Impossible," Jek growled. "There are no unknown forces. We control the entire colony." "Then who is attacking us?" another officer demanded. A moment later, the security feeds cut to static. Kether's blood turned cold. They were already inside. A siren blared, but it was already too late. The Dominion soldiers stationed at the command center began falling one by one. Not from a firefight. There was no sound of gunfire, no alarms of an advancing enemy. Only sudden, eerie silence as guards collapsed at their posts, throats slit or eyes frozen in wide, unblinking terror. "Get a response team down there now." Kether roared, but no one moved. Because the horror was no longer outside. It was inside the room. One of the officers gasped, his mandibles twitching violently. He clutched at his throat, gurgled, and collapsed, a thin red line across his neck, the only sign of a silent execution. Then another soldier fell, and another. Shadows moved between them, silent figures clad in dark, flexible armor, striking and vanishing before the aliens could react. It was only when one of the Dominion guards managed to get a shot off, his plasma rifle screaming in the confined space, that Kether finally saw them. Humans. Not an army. Not a resistance force. Just a handful of operatives, moving through the room like wraiths, their blades flashing, their faces expressionless. How did they? Jack's voice caught in his throat as he staggered backward, his claws gripping at his chest. Kether saw the thin knife protruding from Jack's ribcage just as he collapsed. The remaining Dominion officers panicked. Some fired wildly, others scrambled for the exits. But it didn't matter. The command center was already lost. And for the first time since the invasion began, Kether understood the truth. The humans had never been outnumbered. The Dominion had. They just didn't realize it until now. General Kether had seen planetary invasions turn into bloody wars of attrition before. He had led countless campaigns where desperate rebels clawed for survival against the Dominion's overwhelming power. But never, not once, had he seen an enemy fight like this. There were no open battles, no skirmishes, no desperate last stands. Only the slow, systematic dismemberment of his forces. A war without an enemy. The command center was in chaos. Officers shouted over one another. Screens flickered with red alerts, and distress signals came in from every district of the colony. We've lost contact with Outpost 12. Another supply convoy was hit, no survivors. Command Squad Delta is unresponsive. We sent reinforcements, but they never checked in. Kether's claws scraped against the control panel. His troops weren't being beaten in combat. They were being erased. Commander Jack stood beside him, his mandibles rigid. Sir, we are being dismantled, piece by piece. Kether growled. By what? We have found no resistance cells, no insurgent bases. How are they doing this? Jack's eyes flicked to the monitors displaying the streets of EOS 3. Humans still walked calmly through the occupation, as if they were untouched by the chaos unraveling around them. I don't know, Jack admitted, but we have underestimated them. They are not just fighting back. They are hunting us. Kether slammed his fist on the table. Then we stop running. We hunt them instead. The final command. That night, every remaining Vertani soldier was pulled back to fortified positions. The city was abandoned, the occupation force retreating into heavily guarded zones. They expected a full-scale assault, a last, desperate attempt by the humans to drive them out. But nothing came. No attacks. No explosions. Only silence. And then, the power grid failed. The lights in every Dominion stronghold flickered and died, plunging the fortified zones into darkness. And in the distance, out in the city where no Vertanis dared to walk anymore, came the sound they feared most. Laughter. The hunt was over. The slaughter was about to begin. General Kether's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the command console. The screens flickered with static. His forces reduced to glowing red symbols, symbols that winked out one by one. His army, his fleet, his empire, all vanishing into the void. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was an execution. The humans hadn't fought the way the Dominion expected. They hadn't engaged in desperate skirmishes or begged for mercy. They had waited. They had watched. And when the time came, they struck not with brute force, but with precision, turning the very city the Dominion had captured into a weapon against them. Now, Kether stood in the center of what was supposed to be an unbreakable stronghold, surrounded by the bodies of his own officers. And the humans were coming. No escape. A low, rhythmic hum filled the air, a sign that the planetary defense grid was failing. Emergency sirens howled across the compound. The massive warships in orbit were no longer responding. The Dominion's hold on EOS 3 had collapsed in mere hours. The last of Kether's soldiers scrambled to regroup. Some desperately tried to hail reinforcements, others fortified hallways in preparation for an attack. But the real horror was that they didn't know where the enemy was. There were no formations of human soldiers marching toward them. No fleets arriving in grand displays of power. Only silence, and the shadows between the buildings, shifting ever so slightly. Kether turned to his last remaining officer, a young commander barely out of training. Sir, what do we do? Kether opened his mouth, but there was no answer to give, because it was already over. The end of the Dominion's rule. The first explosions shattered the outer defenses in a series of calculated detonations. Not random bombings, not reckless attacks. Every blast was placed with surgical precision. The eastern walls collapsed, not from brute force, but from structural weaknesses the humans had studied since the day the Dominion arrived. Within moments, the fortress was compromised. Gunfire erupted in the lower levels. Short bursts. No screams. Kether knew what it meant. His forces weren't engaging in a firefight. They were being eliminated. "They're inside," the young commander whispered. A crash of metal rang through the hallways, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. Not the heavy, thudding march of Dominion soldiers, but the soft, careful steps of an enemy that knew exactly where they were going. Then, the lights went out. The last stand. Kether pulled his plasma pistol from its holster. He wasn't going to die cowering behind a console. "Hold your ground," he barked. "We are Dominion. We do not break." The handful of soldiers remaining took up positions, weapons raised, their eyes darting through the darkness. The silence stretched. Then, in an instant, it was broken. A Dominion guard let out a strangled gasp, his weapon falling to the ground. Kether turned just in time to see the soldier collapse, his throat sliced open. The shadows moved. A second soldier screamed, then was dragged into the darkness, his voice cutting off abruptly. Kether fired blindly, his plasma bolts flashing through the dim corridor. He knew the humans were there, but they were too fast, too precise. Another shot, another miss. Then the whisper of a blade, a flash of movement, and then pain. Kether staggered, clutching his side. Blood, his own, spilled between his fingers. He turned wildly, trying to see his attacker. And finally he did. A human operative stood before him, clad in dark armor, their face calm. Not filled with rage. Not hungry for vengeance. Just cold. Kether lunged forward with his claws, but the human was faster. A strike to his wrist sent his weapon clattering to the ground. A second blow sent him to his knees. He gasped, his vision blurring. His empire, his people gone. His fleet obliterated. The Dominion, humbled in a way he never thought possible. The human knelt before him, meeting his gaze. "You should have listened to your elders," they said quietly. Then, with one final strike, everything went dark. The war that wasn't a war. Hours later, the sky above Eos 3 was clear. The last Dominion warship had been scuttled. The city, once occupied by alien invaders, stood intact. Not ruined, not burned, not shattered by reckless warfare. Because humanity hadn't needed to fight a war. They had ended one. The elders had warned the Dominion long ago. Never give humans a reason to fight. They didn't listen. And now, the Dominion no longer existed.